main point of Ecclesiastes 7 is that neither wisdom nor folly provide an escape from life's vanity. All throughout the book, he's very clear to promote wisdom. Wisdom is superior to folly, but it cannot save you from life's vanity, nor can living a life of folly. And if you think that it can, you won't be wise or righteous for very long, because once you find out, hey, even though I'm living wisely and I'm trying to be righteous for God, life is still fleeting, unpredictable, baffling, unfair, and stuck on repeat. And so if you say, maybe I'll turn to folly instead, life is still all of those things. And with folly, your life is even worse, because then you have to suffer the consequences of your actions, and you miss out on the blessings of wisdom. So in verses 1 through 14, he's telling us not to resort to folly in order to escape the hard realities of life. It's hard to face things like sadness and the reality of our own impending death. And it may be tempting to just party all the time and turn to fun and games and entertainment to distract ourselves from the truth of life's vanity. But it doesn't work, because we're still going to face these things. We can run from them, but we can't hide from them. And so instead, Solomon recommends facing the hard realities of life and using them to teach you wisdom, because living wisely is the better way to live. For instance, he says if you're willing to face the reality of your own death, you'll realize how important a good reputation is. And the day of your death will be even better than the day of your birth, because you will have accomplished all these great things, and then instead of being a disgrace at your funeral, you will be honored. And it's better in verse 2 to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, because it reminds you, this is where I am headed. And it reminds you to stay humble and to appreciate the time that you have, because you know this life is fleeting and it's not going to last forever. In verse 3, instead of laughing all the time, you need to feel the sadness of this world, because true joy is only possible on the other side of grief. It's only possible by accepting the sad realities of life. If we deny life's sad realities, we'll be wearing a smile, but on the inside, we'll be in so much pain. Whereas if you wear your sadness on the outside, on the inside, you can be at peace, because you've accepted these hard things. It's much better in verse 5 to be rebuked by a wise man, because he reminds us of reality. Whereas fools, when they sing and they entertain us and they tell us all is well, their advice is totally disconnected from the harsh reality that we live in. And even though it sounds like the fools are having a great time partying and laughing it up, they're just like crackling thorns under a burning pot that are making a bunch of noise but are being burned in the process. And Solomon recognizes in verse 7 how tempting it is to turn to folly, because when you look out at the oppression in this life and all of the injustice, it can drive you mad, and you may be tempted to turn to alcohol and to partying and to drugs or whatever other folly to get your mind off of it. But he tells us, instead of turning to folly, just be patient in verse 8. You'll see in the end that God works things out in his time, instead of being prideful and angry because you can't figure out the baffling things about life, and so you just turn to folly. He says, don't be angry in verse 9. It's tempting for fools to be filled with so much anger about the hard things in life and turn toward bitterness and despair and depression. It's also tempting to think back on the former days in verse 10 and say, back in my day, things used to be so much better. That's just not true. There's nothing new under the sun. We often romanticize our memories, and our memories about how good things are not in accord with the reality of the way things actually were. And so instead, he tells us to choose wisdom and not folly in verses 11 and 12, and he tells us to hand that wisdom down to our children as well. You can give them money as protection. That's helpful as an inheritance, but even more helpful than money is to pass a legacy of wisdom down to your children that does not ignore the harsh realities of life. Because in verse 13, there's nothing you can do to straighten what God has bent. God has bent this world as a part of sin's curse, and turning to folly to distract and numb ourselves from the pain isn't going to change reality. And so instead, in verse 14, embrace the good moments. In the times of prosperity, be happy, but in the bad moments, realize those are there too for a purpose, and embrace those as well, instead of trying to run away and deny that those things are real. And now for the rest of the chapter, he's going to tell us not to turn to righteousness or wisdom to escape life's vanity. And notice there's a distinction here. He's not saying don't be righteous or don't be wise. He's saying don't use those things to escape life's vanity. Because even if you're righteous and wise, life will still be vain. He says, I've seen righteous people, verse 15, who die an early death. They think, if I live righteously, I'm going to prolong my life. In fact, that is traditionally and generally how it goes. That's why in the book of Proverbs, you have a lot of verses about long life tied to wisdom. But he's saying it doesn't always work out that way. Those aren't guarantees because of life's vanity. And you can have a righteous person die way sooner than a wicked person does. And so don't be excessively righteous and wise. Why should you ruin yourself? Don't chase a life of moral perfection in hopes that that will mean life isn't fleeting or unpredictable or baffling or unfair or stuck on repeat anymore. But also, don't turn to wickedness either, thinking that's going to solve life's vanity. He says in verse 18, it is good that you grasp one thing and also not let go of the other. I don't think his point is you should grasp righteousness and wickedness. I don't think those are the two things he's telling us to grasp. The two things are grasp righteousness, but also grasp that that righteousness will not reverse life's vanity. Take hold of both of those things. It's good to be righteous, but it's not good to use that righteousness to manipulate life so that you're more in control of its outcomes, or to manipulate God and to think like Job's friends did, if I do righteous things, then only good things will happen to me. That kind of thinking will lead to your ruin. And so again, in verses 19 through 22, wisdom is better than folly. Wisdom strengthens a wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. But if you're relying on your righteousness to save you from life's vanity, it's also going to be a challenge because none of us are perfect. And you're going to commit wicked deeds because there's not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and never sins. Not only that, but life will still be vain because other people sin against you. And you shouldn't be surprised about that because you wrong other people too. It's part of what makes life so vain and why we're under the curse of sin, because we sin against others and they sin against us, and we continue to perpetuate the curse of sin in every generation because of it. In verses 23 and 24, he says another reason not to rely on wisdom as an escape for vanity is because you can never be wise enough to figure this life out. It's like Socrates, who said, all I know is that I know nothing, because the more you learn, the more you realize you just don't know, and life is so beyond your grasp. In verse 25, he says, I tried wisdom as an escape for life's vanity, and that didn't work. And then I tried evil and folly as an escape for vanity, and that didn't work because I got sucked into sexual immorality with women, and that was even worse than death for him. In verse 27 and 28, in all of his wisdom and efforts to explain the complexities of life's vanity, he still comes up short. But one thing I can do is I can tell you how hard it is to find a righteous person in this world. If I can find a righteous man, it's 1 in 1,000. And among women, I haven't found any. Now keep in mind, wisdom literature was mainly written to young men, and so I don't think he's making a blanket statement that women are more evil than men. I think he's just exaggerating to show how wicked people really are, that you can hardly find a single righteous man, and the reason as a man you have to be so careful is because there's so many wicked women who are trying to bind your heart in chains. And he concludes in verse 29 by talking about men and women in saying that God created us upright, but we have sought out many creative ways to sin against God and to give ourselves over to folly. And many times we do that because we're trying to escape life's vanity, and it just won't work. In fact, it only perpetuates and makes the vanity worse in our own lives because we miss out on the blessings of wisdom and will be embittered and ensnared by the chains of sin in our lives. And so the application is, do not believe Satan when he tries to convince you that sin will make life so much easier. If you just give in to pleasure, well, then you don't have to face your sadness and you don't have to think about all the hard things in life. Don't listen to him, because sin, while it seems to provide temporary relief, ultimately only makes things sadder and harder and more painful, because now we're stuck living in this sin-cursed world under the vanity of life without the blessings and the comfort and the joy of wisdom. Likewise, do not believe Satan when he convinces you if you'll just live righteously, well then that means everything will go well for you in life and God will orchestrate everything so that things go your way. way all the time. If we believe that lie, we're going to abandon God and we're going to give up on righteousness, because that's not how it works. Satan loves to convince us to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And that's the wrong reason to be righteous. And this points to Jesus, because Jesus was the most righteous man to ever live. He is the exception to verse 20 in today's reading. He is the only man who continually did good and never sinned, and yet he still faced life's vanity. Life was still fleeting for him. He still died way younger than many wicked people do, in a completely nonsensical and baffling and unfair and broken way. And you also see in Jesus that he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, that even though he went to have meals at people's homes and to enjoy the good things of life like Ecclesiastes talks about, he did not give himself over to partying and to drunkenness and to just fun and games all the time, to ignore the harsh realities of life. He faced those things head on. His mind was continually in the house of mourning, thinking about his upcoming crucifixion, which gave him the wisdom to live each moment in righteous obedience to God, not to escape life's vanity, because he knew it could not be escaped. He knew life was still going to end with him on a cross, but he was righteous to please his Father in heaven. So our prayer today is, Father, keep me far away from folly, because I want the blessings of wisdom, but keep me also away from being wise and righteous to make life work the way I want it to. Instead, help me be righteous and wise, because that's what pleases you. And it's what gives me hope, like Jesus, that when this life under the sun is over, I will have hope of a new life beyond the sun with you.